Hello, everybody. Welcome. You are listening to the Pure Strategies Conversations webinar series. We are so excited to offer these unique discussions to help you transform your business to create a more sustainable future. I am Melanie Fleming, Marketing Manager for Pure Strategies. Our team provides sustainability consulting to companies looking to develop goals, enhance their sustainability program, and implement changes in their products, packaging, and supply chains. We are offering these short webinars to provide insight that will help companies in their work to advance environmental and social performance in their business, helping to show you the possibilities for change and empower you with examples and insights from those at the very forefront. You can find our past webinars, research reports, and resources on our website, purestrategies.com, including information about the work we have done for Seventh Generation, Walmart, Ben & Jerry's, and other sustainability leaders. During this 30-minute webinar, you will hear from Cheryl Baldwin, VP of Sustainability Consulting for Pure Strategies. In addition to working with our clients, developing and executing sustainability strategies, Cheryl has authored several books, including the book, The 10 Principles of Food Industry Sustainability. Cheryl will be talking today with Jessica McGlyn, Corporate Engagement Lead for Science Based Targets Network. Jessica has more than 20 years of sustainability operational and policy experience. Before joining Science Based Targets Network, Jessica served as the North American Director of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, where she was responsible for member and stakeholder engagement, business development, and program and policy support. Prior to that, Jessica worked for the World Wildlife Fund on a variety of environmental, climate, and forest policy issues. She also worked for International Paper Company on sustainability and supply chain issues. Also joining us today is Samantha McCrane, Technical Coordinator, Science Based Targets Network. Samantha has been working with the Science Based Targets Network since autumn 2020. She has a master's in environmental policy and regulation from the London School of Economics and a bachelor's in international development from McGill University. Between studies, Sam has spent time conducting primary environmental research in Panama, New York City, and Bangladesh. Today, Cheryl, Jessica, and Sam will discuss what science-based targets for nature are and why companies should consider setting them. They will also provide insight on the interconnectedness of nature and climate-based solutions to help you set science-based targets that include fresh water, biodiversity, land, and oceans. We aim to have time at the end of their conversation to cover your questions. The audience will be muted, so please provide your questions in the Q&A field, and I promise I'll ask as many questions as time will allow. We will also be recording this session and will post it on the Pure Strategies website. And now, I'd like to hand it off to Cheryl.
Great, thanks, Melanie. Well, I'm really excited to have both Jess and Sam with us today. And I really wanted to have this discussion because the work that we're doing at Pure Strategies, consulting with companies on their sustainability programs, has had a lot of interest and activity in setting science-based targets for climate. And that work is really focused on using science and existing standards to set targets so that companies are doing their share of the work in reducing emissions globally. But the topic of setting science-based targets is broader than that. So I'm really excited to have you both to help us better understand that. So let's get started. Maybe we'll just begin with you telling us a little bit more about the Science-Based Target Network and what science-based targets for nature include.
Great, Cheryl, thanks a lot. So we are a coalition of over 30 global environmental NGOs and mission-based consultants. And some of the names that you might recognize include World Economic Forum, WWF, CI, TNC, CDP, and a host of others. And we are building on the foundation that has been set for over 5 years by the Science Based Target Initiative, which is also one of our partners, who, as Cheryl already mentioned, have methodologies to set science-based targets for climate. And they've been quite successful. Over 900 companies have made commitments to set science-based targets for climate, and we're building on that success now. And our goal is to create methodologies for companies and also cities to set integrated science-based targets for their impacts across all Earth systems, all of nature. So that means land and oceans, biodiversity, fresh water, and did I forget anything, Sam? Those are the key ones. And the goal here is so that we can operate within a safe and just space that the Earth will allow us to operate within. To do the science part of the science-based targets for nature, we're working with a group called the Earth Commission. So this is a big group of scientists that are helping us develop all the science that goes into backing the methodologies that we're about to put out. We will be issuing interim guidance on what we're doing at the end of September, so everyone will be able to see what we're talking about in some detail, and it provides a really good framework of where we're aiming for, and the methodologies themselves will be finalized in 2022.
Good, thanks. And you mentioned the Science-Based Target Initiative, which has been focusing on climate. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you guys work with that organization and maybe some of the others that are focused on some of the other topics you'd mentioned, like Business for Nature or One Planet, Business for Biodiversity?
Sure, there's a lot of different groups. So like I said, SBTI, they're one of our key partners. They're on our steering committee, and a lot of the same players are helping them create some more methods, for example, around the forests and lands and agriculture space. For climate, it's the same exact people working on our methodologies. So there's a lot of crossover, and we're going to continue to build that because we know whatever we create has to be additive and add value to what companies are doing and not create extra work for no reason. So we're being very conscientious about building on existing platforms like SBTI with our work. Business for Nature is another key partner, and really their primary goal is to build a policy voice amongst companies for action on nature. And so they have a platform where companies sign up and demonstrate commitments to nature, and that's to signal to governments that companies are taking nature issues seriously, they care about it, and they want to see some action. And you might hear this term with NGOs called the ambition loop, and so this is also part of SBTI, where companies take voluntary actions and make voluntary policies to do better, and then governments hear what they're saying and create policies to support the companies and what their goals are, and then the companies can do even better. So that's a connection. Okay. And then one other one we get asked often is our relationship to Capitals Coalition, and they're another partner. So they are the ones that created a way of evaluating nature for a company, and that's really pretty important to our work, and so we build on their platform and others like them in terms of value chain mapping.
Okay, good. Yep.
If I can just add to that, so we're working very directly with the Capitals Coalition, as well as we're developing our sort of approach to setting science-based targets for nature. So we're trying to make sure that companies working with us don't have to sort of join up to multiple different initiatives. They can sort of tie everything together through the process of setting science-based targets. So actually the sort of process of assessing your impacts and dependencies on nature, which is really core to the Natural Capital Protocol, is embedded within the process of setting science-based targets for nature. And I know Jess mentioned the ambition loop, and I think that's a really key point to make, because companies can actually drive the ambition of countries, as she's saying, of governments, as she's saying. But also what we're doing is creating that cycle in nature as well as in climate. So we can hopefully create sort of reinforcing ambition loops in those two different issue areas to drive up the total ambition on nature and climate together. So both of these environmental issue areas.
Good, thanks. And you'd mentioned that there's interim guidance coming. I wonder if you could give us maybe a little preview and like walk at a high level, like the general approach companies might take as they think about setting science-based targets for nature.
I could give a very high level one, and then Sam can chime in because she's actually the orchestrator of the guidance. So I'm sure she'll have a lot to add. So the guidance is intended to help companies get started right now towards the goal of setting a science-based target for nature when those methods are available. And it provides a framework for doing that. And it's a 5-step process, which starts with value chain mapping and materiality impact assessment. So understanding your impacts and dependencies on nature within your value chain is a key component to get started. And we've been talking to lots and lots of companies, and I'm always surprised how many haven't actually done this. So the guidance is meant to help companies that have never started this to get going. There's enough advice there that a company, any company will be able to pick it up and say, oh, okay, this is how you do it and this is how I get started. It's also recognizing that a lot of companies have already done some value chain mapping, especially on the supply chain side. So anyone who's done a scope 3, assessment, for example, on climate, you've done a portion of value chain mapping. So it builds on things you've already done, but kind of highlights gaps that might be there. So if you're only focused on climate, but your sector has material impacts, say, on fresh water, then it highlights that, hey, there's a gap here, and you need to understand where those impacts are in your value chain, both geographically and within your, your value chain, what part of your value chain, so that you can ultimately prioritize action, both in place and with on what action you're going to take with respect to impacts. Sam, do you want to take it from there? I've been talking a lot on the next steps.
Sure. So just as a sort of high level comment to make about this, we are still waiting for the science that will really underpin the science-based targets. So what we're doing with this guidance is putting forward everything we can to date, which is really trying to put forward at least the foundations for a business case on why companies should set science-based targets. Why does it matter? So that those companies that maybe are interested in taking sustainability actions but haven't quite been able to make the case will have a bit more sort of ammunition to make that case, and to illustrate the value add of SBTN in that space in particular. We also are sort of defining what are SBTs for nature, because this is a relatively new concept. So we're really planting our flag in the ground with this guidance and showing this is what SBTN is, this is what we intend to deliver with SBTs for nature over the next 2 years. So I don't know if we've mentioned that yet, but our sort of the date that we're working towards for really putting forward quote unquote final methodologies for setting science-based targets for nature is 2022. So, but there's a lot of work that we anticipate companies needing to do and ourselves needing to do in the meantime. So we're trying to lay out that sort of plan for action and be able to signal to companies this is what's coming, so they can start getting ready now if they're interested in getting ready now. And so you might be asking, why are we publishing this year if everything's not ready? But we really just can't wait. Action for nature needs to be taken now. This was branded the super year, and we have no reason for it to not be the super year for nature. So we're trying to put forward everything that we can right now to get companies able to start. And as Jess said, we try to lay out the sort of process that we anticipate companies to need to go through in order to set science-based targets. To give them better insight into sort of what resources they'll need to have available to go through these steps, but also to start thinking about what have they already done that can be used to support the process of setting science-based targets. And that's also a lot of what our work over the last few months and over the months to come is going to really entail, is working with companies, working with consultancies to identify the linkages that we can make so that we can make this as sort of simple of a process as possible and pull together pieces rather than adding something new. So that's a lot of what's in the interim guidance. And yeah, as I said, we're really still waiting for some key things to come out, like the Global Biodiversity Framework under the Convention for Biological Diversity, the CBD. So while we wait for that work to come out and that sort of overall goal to come out that's endorsed at a global level, there are some limitations on where we can get to with science-based targets.
Yeah, so it's sounding like it's a work in progress, but you're going to be getting out information that's really going to help keep the momentum moving forward. And we've seen that, there's been, it's 2020, there's a lot of goals kind of expiring. And so companies are looking at where they want to go next. And so it sounds like it's really good timing to have at least the concepts that you're describing available to companies as they start to think about where they might go with their program. So we've been doing some of this work, and you mentioned some terminology that I find a little confusing to some of our clients. And I know that we don't have time to go into technical detail today. We'll do that another time. But I wonder if you could clarify this terminology a little bit, which is impacts and dependencies. And maybe give an example of what the difference is between those.
Yeah, so an impact is an action that a company takes either directly or within their supply chain that creates a pressure on nature of some sort. So an example would be if you have food in your supply chain, like a crop, and there's spraying fertilizers that are harmful, that could have an impact on freshwater or biodiversity, like pollinators could be impacted by that. And then the dependency part of that is then what happens because of that action of the pollinator impacts. And that means maybe you're going to have a decrease in yields on your crops because fertilizer has been used and has taken out the bees, just as one very concrete example.
Yeah, I suppose to add, so some people might be familiar with thinking about nature as a sort of sink of environmental impacts, but then also as a source of environmental goods. And that's another way to sort of break apart that framework. And then, as Jess was saying, you can think about impacts as being sort of those, well, you can have positive impacts towards nature, but it's often the sort of negative impacts like pollution yeah, like deforestation, things like that. Versus your dependencies are maybe something that is perhaps less tangible to companies in first thought, around like water regulation and the sort of nature's contributions to people or ecosystem services that nature is constantly providing to people and businesses and that we all rely on. And that's actually one of the sort of benefits of thinking through our relationship with nature in that way, because we often focus on like our harmful impacts on nature. And we don't necessarily think about how we so desperately rely on nature for, I think it's like over $40 trillion worth of ecosystem services. And yeah, sorry, I'm just thinking through, yeah, so when you also break up your relationship with nature into those two different ways, then you can sort of get a better understanding of the different types of risks and hazards that you as a company face, because the different risks that you face due to pollution might be more linked to like regulation or reputational risks, versus the risks that you face related to sort of water cycling or hazard regulation would be more linked to sort of like disruption of your business operations. So there are different sort of risks and I suppose opportunities that are associated with taking action or failing to take action on those different impacts and dependencies.
Okay, cool. Thank you. That helped a lot. And I guess to kind of make this a bit more concrete, have you seen company targets that you feel like are headed in the right direction? I know we don't have the science to like say this is the right exact target, but do you have maybe a few ideas of things that are looking to be headed in the right direction?
Well, I'd say like, there's been a lot of experimentation with this for the last few years. So Alpro, for example, did a very extensive study with WWF in Europe. So Alpro is a food and beverage company, and they're a subsidiary of Danone. So they tried to look into this. So they did the materiality assessment, and they did the value chain mapping, and they figured out where their biggest impacts were from that process. So that's very aligned with what we're doing, and great, and they did a good job on that. And then they were able to highlight where they were having the biggest impact so that they can prioritize, which is really the second step in our process. So it is aligned with how we're thinking about it. And then they chose some indicators to measure against their key impacts, which is something we're also going to be introducing, an indicator framework. So there's already a lot of crossover with what they did and what we're planning. Where they had trouble, and they identified this as things that really nobody knows how to do. A couple of things is, one, to come up with an integrated target. So you can come up, for example, for a target to take care of your pressures on fresh water, but then how do you integrate that with biodiversity, land, climate, and all the other things you want to take care of so that you have co-benefits rather than trade-offs? And they acknowledged in their work they were not successful in figuring that out, and that's something that we're doing now. So we're figuring that out with our framework. So that's one thing. And then the other big issue was they recognized that they were able to come up with some targets that would fit with what the local environment could handle, but it did not take into account what the social needs were. So for example, like who are the other stakeholders using the same landscape or using the same watershed? They didn't have a process to do that in a way, and we call this allocation, to fairly divide up the rights to use that water and land in a way that's socially equitable and just and meets with government targets and all that. And they recognize that as another deficiency, and that's another thing that we are working on with Earth Commission. So that's a gap we're going to be filling.
Yeah, I would add to that just to say that another example that is commonly referred to is caring. But again, these are really large, well-resourced companies. So what we're trying to also look for now are examples of maybe smaller companies, different companies throughout supply chains that might be setting or pursuing targets that are somewhat in line with science-based targets. And I would highlight that one of the key challenges that Caring faced in trying to set science-based targets for water was also related to allocation. It's a really tricky issue, and it's very hard to do not only at a site level, but then also sort of value chain wide processes of allocation. And that's something that we're actively working on.
Yeah, I guess one company that I found useful for other companies to kind of look to is Mars. They're a food and pet food company, and they have a science-based target for climate. They also have one for land. They also have a target for land. And their targets to hold the land area associated with their value chain flat to their 2015 levels, which is kind of interesting because they base that approach on what the science was suggesting for kind of the boundaries with that. They also have a context-based target for water, which again, I think they provide some good information for companies, at least for now, to maybe start to look at and start to learn from. This is one suggestion. And I guess related to that, some Mars-based.
Can I just add like the context-based water stuff? I just wanted to say that the science-based targets that we're developing are building on that already. So if folks in your network are already working on that, they're in good shape because we're just going to be adding to that, not changing it. So.
Yeah, okay. Great. Yeah, and I guess I was just going to bring us back to one of the points you guys made earlier about the interconnectedness of climate and nature. And then just like thinking about like Mars's corporate targets, like they've got land and they've got water and climate. And a lot of the solutions and actions that you would take to meet, those types of targets are very similar. Is that what you guys are seeing in some of this work and where it might be headed?
Yeah, we're really trying very actively to integrate what we're doing with the nature-based solutions. I know they come up with different terminologies, but that we're definitely headed in that direction. And that would fall under what the fourth step of our 5-step process is. So that's the ACT portion of setting a science-based target. We're using the conservation or mitigation hierarchy to establish what we recommend companies do. So start with avoiding the impact, then go to reduce, then restore and regenerate, and then finally transform. And so nature-based solutions would fall into one of those buckets. But and a science-based target will let you know, are you doing enough? Or do you need to do more? Can you do less? That's one of the beauties of it in terms of delivering on what you've made commitments around. I know a lot of companies have committed to SDGs. What we're doing is going to be able to help you quantify, are you doing enough on your SDGs? And and give you solid proof that you are. Same with deforestation-free commitments and a whole host of other commitments that companies have been making. This is a quantifiable way of demonstrating that your action is enough.
Good. So I know we're getting a little short in time, so maybe I'll just do one more question and then we'll see what Melanie has for us from the audience, just to kind of get us to where do you see companies should go from here based on the work that you guys are doing?
Well, we would love for companies to read the guidance when it comes out at the end of September and give us feedback. Our intention is to co-design the methods and the tools and approaches with companies and cities, so that we'll know it's as usable as it can be, despite all the technical and scientific complexity. And so we're going to create a pathway for companies to do that that will be unveiled at the end of September. So that would be a great thing to do. If you want to get on our information list, you can register on our website. If you haven't already started value chain mapping, that's the first step any company can do, and the guidance can help you with that if you want to wait for the guidance to come out, or you can work with great consultants like you, Cheryl, to get it going. And then if you have not yet set a science-based target for climate with SBTI, we strongly recommend that companies do that and also get used to disclosing information, because we're going to be using some of the platforms. We haven't decided which ones yet, but CDP is a very close partner of ours. So we may be using these platforms to help us verify, validate stuff. All that's TBD, but again, just if your company has not yet disclosed your environmental performance, it would be a good idea to get started. Did I miss anything, Sam?
Sorry, I was typing an answer to a question.
Oh, okay. I don't think so. Okay.
I assume you answered it well.
Okay.
Yeah. So we'll let Melanie maybe look at the Q&A and see what we've heard from the audience, and we'll take some of those questions now.
Sure. Well, the first one, I'd like to start with you, Cheryl. Well, you've touched upon this a little bit, but I think we'd like to hear both perspectives from Cheryl and from Jess. If a company doesn't have a science-based target for climate, or maybe struggling to advance their science-based target for climate, should they add in these other topics as well for biodiversity, freshwater, et cetera? So if we could start with you.
So yeah, I'll just pick up where Jess kind of mentioned, and that is, the companies have found that climate is a material topic, which I'm sure they would if they were to go through a materiality assessment. They should be setting science-based target for climate. In thinking about, we know that those have been, hard to set, hard to kind of get approval and internally and start to move forward with, because it's a new concept. But there are other reasons why companies sometimes struggle, and there's just quite a few without time really to cover today. But good news is we happen to have a report that's coming out next Tuesday that we sponsored that will be available on our website, so you can take a look, and it covers really just thinking about advanced climate strategy and getting a lot of case studies and information from companies on how their experiences with setting science-based targets for climate and being able to make some progress in that space. So I'd say look to that report for the climate piece. In terms of kind of the broader level, I'd say Jess said the materiality assessment helps you highlight what issues are important, and companies should be addressing those issues. And this framework provides a means to be able to address the topics that rise to the top: water, oceans, land, biodiversity, whatever those may be for that organization. So along with climate. So let's see if Jess and Sam have anything to add to that.
100% agree. And actually, we're very interested in understanding what the barriers are to companies to setting science-based targets for climate. So where we can remove some of those barriers for science-based targets for nature, we would like to do that. So if any company wants to share that with us, we are all ears. We'll do what we can to address it within our framework.
Great, thank you. I'd like to answer this one as well. We received the question: the strength of the science-based target for climate is in validating targets with temperature trajectories. How will this allocation be done with regards to nature and especially biodiversity?
That's for you, Sam.
It's everybody's least favorite answer, but biodiversity is spatially explicit. So it's going to depend on each different place that a company is operating. So there are many different approaches to allocation. We still have to figure out which one of these is most appropriate for which circumstance, and maybe ideally come up with a short list of these. One of the common critiques of carbon trading schemes, for instance, is that they will follow grandfathering schemes, which don't necessarily change sort of the status quo of behaviors. So we're trying to figure out what is the sort of best allocation scheme to follow for nature in order to actually get us to the sort of systemic shifts that we need to have happen in order to stay within planetary boundaries. And just on the note around validation, that is something that also is sort of down the line for SBTN. We're not going to tackle that question until we actually have a firm approach to setting targets established. But yeah, actually determining how much companies need to do. We have identified a sort of short list of the different factors that need to be considered. Let me just, so as I said, it's the state of nature in the places where you're operating, but it's also factors like what's sort of the dependence of the different people in the places where you are operating, what are the needs and capacities of the local stakeholders, what's the contribution of you as a company to the total impact in that area currently and over time. And if we don't have that data, maybe approximate based on sort of sector level contributions, if that's appropriate. It could be considerations around like what is the contribution of that specific location or commodity to your overall impact as a company. There are also considerations around how much control and influence you actually have over the impacts in that area, because that has a lot of influence over, or that will sort of, how do I use a word that's not impact or influence, that will help determine how much effort needs to be taken by you as a company to resolve those impacts. And then other pieces that influence allocation in terms of how much action needs to be taken are the pressures on you as a company from your company level stakeholders, like investors and shareholders. But then also the policy environment where you're operating will help determine how much action needs to be taken in a certain place. So I know that's a quite long answer. Happy to get you a tapped out version of that. But yeah, there are a lot of different factors at play in determining how much a company actually needs to do in each place.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your great answer. I can't believe it, we are actually out of time. I don't know if Jess or Cheryl, you want to say any final words, and otherwise we'll unfortunately have to close and try to get to answer some of these questions offline as well.
Just appreciate the time and a chance to share with you what we're working on. We'd really love for you guys to sign up when the guidance comes out, give us feedback, and work with us over the next 2 years to develop a really great product.
Great, terrific. Well, thank you for your insights and your thoughtful conversation. That is all the time we have for today's webinar. It went by much too quickly, but we hope that you enjoyed this conversation on science-based targets for nature. A very special thank you to Jess and Samantha for all of your time and your insights today. The recording of this conversation will be on the Pure Strategies website within the next 24 to 48 hours. Our next webinar will be on September 16th with Ashley C. Hall, Director of Sustainable Packaging for Walmart. Excuse me for one moment. Trying to get you to our next slide. There we go. She will be joining us, and if you would like to be informed of future webinars like this one, you can sign up for our newsletter on our website, purestrategies.com. The Pure Strategies website also has lots of additional resources that might be of use for your work, and certainly feel free to reach out to Cheryl directly. Her information is on your screen. We'll be signing off for now, and we look forward to connecting with you or having you attend another Pure Strategies Conversations webinar in the very near future. Stay well, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Sorry we're a little over. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.